Okay, over the weekend we had polls released in 3 big states, 2 battleground states, and one that is really not a battleground, but the media continues to report as if it is. What states? Pennsylvania, where Biden is up by 1.5 roughly, in my average. Florida, where Trump is slightly ahead. It's basically a tie in Florida. And last, Texas. We had a poll there, a quite revealing poll. We'll talk about the margin there in a few moments. First, Pennsylvania. Now, where are we at in Pennsylvania? Again, I show Biden is ahead by 1.5. Pollsters say he's up by 4.5 points. Now, what's the difference? Here's the graph, the two graphs, competing graphs. Here we see the pollsters chart, and then we have my chart on the right. What is the difference? The difference here comes down to voter turnout assumptions. Pollsters, almost universally, not entirely, but almost universally, are assuming a massive turnout for Democrats. Now, I do think turnout will be up a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be a massive landslide turnout. There are a lot of reasons for this. One, this mail-in vote. There's going to be a lot of people who don't mail-in vote, who otherwise probably would have voted if they go and do it in person. That's just a matter of the numbers. There will be some who would vote who otherwise wouldn't vote. That is true, but it is a more complicated matter to vote by mail than it is to register. A lot of people register at their DMV when they go to renew a registration for their car, and then they're registered, and that's it. All they have to do is go show up and vote on Election Day. Everybody's talking about it on Election Day, and it's actually a more likely scenario for a person to vote in person than it is to rely on the mail-in ballot. Now, we'll talk about this more in another video. It's actually been shown that once access to voting has been made easier by early voting, by mail-in voting, turnout actually has gone down in those states. And we can talk more about that later. There are studies demonstrating this. So, back to the polls in Pennsylvania. The difference between my averages and their averages is that I'm assuming a turnout that's more consistent with what we've seen over the last 30 years. So, what polls came out? We have the Trafalgar Group poll, which shows a 2-point lead for Biden, 47 to 45. Now, this was the best poll in Pennsylvania, I believe, in 2016. So it's worth paying attention to. They're showing that Biden has a slight, ever so slight edge. It's within the margin of error. Not a place that Biden wants to be, considering that this is a blue wall state. Of course, also, you got to say not a place that Trump wants to be. It's about a dead heat, according to the Trafalgar Group poll. Let's look at the next poll, Climate Nexus. They're showing a 5-point lead for Biden. Now, the difference in the polls, the Trafalgar Group survey is of likely voters, and the Climate Nexus survey is of registered voters. One more point about the Trafalgar Group poll. I do not include their numbers in my average, and that is because they don't report a party distribution, and they don't report the voter ratios within those parties, meaning how many Democrats voted for Biden versus Trump, and the same with independents, same with Republicans. They don't report those partisan numbers, so I don't include them in my averages. It is, however, a good poll. They do report other internals, but I just don't include them in my averages. Climate Nexus. It's a registered voter poll versus a likely voter poll in Trafalgar Group. The reason that registered voter polls are less useful, much less useful, in predicting elections is because the group that they're polling, a lot of them are not going to come out and vote. Somewhere between 20 and 30% of those registered voters included in this poll will not vote. So I apply a registered voter screen, and here I'll put up a screenshot that you can read through that. It explains it. In a nutshell, my registered voter screen assumes that about 30% of those registered voters will not vote, and slightly more of those are going to be Democrat leaners than Republican leaners. Now, where do I get this? I get this from time tested over and over again, election after election. I used the 2016 numbers to make my registered voter screen for this time, but it applies in every election. By and large, Democrat leaners tend to show up to vote a little less than Republican leaners. So once you apply the registered voter screen, here's what it looks like. All right, so now we've seen that both polls are showing about a dead heat with Biden a point, maybe 2-point lead right now. Let's move on to Florida. In Florida, showing essentially a dead heat. Yesterday it was exactly tied. Today Trump has 0.2 of a point advantage. Here you can see the polls. Trump has taken a lead over the last few weeks since the conventions. What poll did we see this weekend? We saw a CBS YouGov poll. Their result is Biden +2. Problem with this poll is it is a registered voter poll. Now, they say it's a likely voter survey, but they poll 1,220 registered voters, eliminate 15 of them, and then call it a likely voter poll. Sorry. If you're going to have a registered voter poll, just call it that. A likely voter poll, if you've called or done online, however you're going to do the survey, 1,220 registered voters, should end up including somewhere between 900 to 1,000 likely voters, not 1,205. This is a registered voter sample. I'm going to treat it that way. Now, they assume an even turnout among the partisans. I think that's fine. That's probably a fair assumption in Florida. However, that is Republicans and Democrats. Same number of each party probably going to turn out to vote in terms of their percentage. But they only assume 27% right here are independents. That's not going to be right. About a third of the electorate's going to be independents in Florida. So I adjust that. I take the numbers that they found. That Biden won 94% of Democrats. Trump won 5% of Democrats. In their sample, Trump won independents by 3 points, 46 to 43. And Trump won Republicans 90 to 7. Now, I did apply a registered voter filter to this number, the independent number, because that's where most of your unlikely voters are. And they are going to lean Democrat by and large. So I apply the registered voter filter, get 4940 in the independent column for Trump. You apply these ratios to the more likely voter turnout scenario, and you get a 2-point lead for Trump based on that data. So that's where we are. Statistically speaking, it's a jump ball in Florida. Now let's move on to the last state, Texas. I'm showing Texas is now clearly in Trump's column with a 7.5-point lead for Trump. Pollsters are showing a 1.5-point lead for Trump. What's the difference? Voter turnout assumptions. I'm about to demonstrate that quite clearly. YouGov again. They report a 2-point lead for Trump in Texas. Here's the problem. Their voter turnout assumption is funny, all right? They assume more Democrats are going to vote in Texas than Republicans. Not going to happen. Have Democrats been moving to the state of Texas in large numbers? Yes, they've been coming from California. They've been coming from New York in large numbers. True. Austin is a very blue city. Okay? That's also true. It's still Texas. Last time, the voter turnout was 38% Republican, 29% Democrat. This time, you're not going to have a complete takeover of Texas by Democrat voters. It's not going to happen. Maybe the Republicans only get a 4 or 5 point advantage. I don't know. I assume that it's the same as last time because of voter intensity and other factors. And if you assume that, based on the internals of the YouGov poll, you get a big lead for Trump of 12 points. Now, let's say it's only a 5 or 6 point advantage for Republicans this time. He's still going to be up 6 or 7 points because he won independents 50 to 36 right here. So I think it's safe to say, based on, now this, the PPP poll that came out a couple weeks ago, that is a Democrat pollster. They had Trump in the lead. Adjusted, Trump was up 5 with their numbers. University of Texas, a very left pollster. They have Trump up 2. Adjusted, Trump's up around 5. Morning Consult, that's a slight lead for Trump. Same problem. I can't adjust their numbers because they don't release the internals. Bottom line is, you see the same picture emerge over and over again. You look at the internals of the polls, Trump is up in Texas. So, 3 states, Texas, Pennsylvania, Florida, where are we at? It is still a dead heat in Pennsylvania. It is a dead heat in Florida. And Trump has taken control of Texas. More polls later today.